Yeah, I think that's why polls have clearly shifted in that direction. I would say the uncertainty is still high, just given how flat the distribution is of the polls across parties. But I think it is pretty clear that Scholz is now the front runner to be the next chancellor. We think all of the parties are taking a keen interest in climate issues. So the Greens, of course, are going to push this more than others, but I don't think that's the major area of disagreement. I think the biggest shifts we should look for is really on public investment. The sort of center-left leaning coalitions are probably going to push more for that. The Greens have been quite vocal about a big expansion of public investment. Then, of course, we think the overall stance is going to be more expansionary under a center-left than a center-right outcome, probably implies somewhat bigger deficits. And then lastly, there's probably going to be more flexibility on questions of EU-wide fiscal policy under a Scholz-led coalition that involves the Green than under the current government. So I would say those are probably the main factors. And I think bottom line is that the German fiscal landscape is probably shifting in a more expansionary direction relative to what we saw under the Merkel years.
Interesting. Germany, of course, is very reliant on foreign demand as a key exporter in the Eurozone. And we got some data out overnight out of China. Retail sales, the key there, and it was really disappointing, but added to a raft of softening data out of China recently. What does China's slowdown mean for Germany and for Europe overall near term?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly important. Europe and Germany in particular are still very dependent on global trade. And we have cut our forecasts across the globe for China, for the US, for other countries. So that is clearly going to be somewhat of a headwind for Europe. But I would point to a couple of things that suggest to us that Europe is still pretty well placed to grow relatively quickly in the second half of the year. One is that you have a big backlog of orders. So these supply chain issues and backlogs have held back production, particularly in Germany in the second quarter, but orders are still very high. So I think there's a good pipeline that we should expect to come through once these bottlenecks start to ease. And then the second point is, of course, that much of the recovery is much more about services than about manufacturing. And when you look at where services spending is across the euro area, it's still subdued relative to pre-pandemic levels. And some of the magnitudes here are really quite big. And so I think the China slowdown is going to be somewhat of a drag, but I think it will be more than outweighed for the pent-up demand in COVID-sensitive services that we still have to cover. And we think Europe is pretty well placed relative to other countries in the second half of the year to continue to grow.